It now gives me great pleasure to welcome CEO of the Regional Australian Institute, Mr Jack Archer. And this name does come up quite often, and I think most of you would be well aware of this position. Jack has been with the Institute since 2012 and has been CEO since 2015. In previous roles, Jack has contributed to major regional reform in water, climate change, Indigenous issues and industry. Would you please welcome Jack Archer?
G'day. So I got accused of being a frequent flyer at this event when I came in this morning. Michael, I'm just happy to keep getting a ticket, really. So thanks for having me again. So I run the Regional Australian Institute. I know many people in the room pretty well now after being in this gig in one way or another for 5 or 6 years, but I know it's a big group and people move through roles in council. So we're sort of the opposite end to Natalie. They're doing the very granular practical funding. I'm in Canberra doing the very high level political nonsense most of the time. I mean, we're an independent not-for-profit. We make the case for regions. We try and bring forward the things that are happening in regions around the country and get them into the policy debate. Regionalaustralia.org.au is our website for anybody who hasn't spent time looking at our stuff. I wanted to talk and just really update the group today about community-led migration and the things that we've been doing to get regional workforce needs and regional community opportunity on the agenda as part of this big population discussion we're having at the moment. Really, all we've been doing in this is reflecting some pretty simple statistical work my crew did, which I'll talk you through shortly, which shows how important migration is. And some of you may have been at an event a couple of years ago, the summit that Jala Pulford had, where I made the case that, if you're worried about your population in small communities, international migration should be where you put your focus, because that's what works. But since that time, the amazing examples of the way communities have been leading the way and facilitating that, and really regional Victoria has been the heart of that. There's other communities around the country who have been doing things as well, but really today I'm talking about an opportunity you guys have created, and it's a unique time. It's a unique time to make some hay on this issue, given the population debate, and it needs to be a community-led issue. So we think there's an opportunity to scale this up. There's a lot of government interest in this at the moment, but it is really up to groups like yourself to make the running and to make this happen. We're in a moment in time right now, elections with the current population debate, where this issue is hot, and people who couldn't give a stuff about these kind of issues for you guys 98% of the time kind of care for their own purposes at the moment. So we need to take advantage of that, and I think we already are, but I guess the question for discussion, and I'll want to get a bit of discussion going, is, where do we want to take community leadership on this? There's people in the room working on this, and so I'm interested to hear your views. So the title is Scaling Up Community-Led Migration in Rural Australia. So we know migrants are moving permanently to rural areas, and just to be really clear, I'm talking about permanent migration. I'm not talking about fruit pickers, I'm not talking about backpackers, I'm talking about people moving to communities with their families to settle for the long term and work in local jobs. We know we've got workforce shortages around the country, and the workforce shortage data I'll show you in a second doesn't capture rural town needs at all. Most of the workforce needs in rural towns won't be in the numbers that are here, so I'd suspect for you guys they're low. We think community-led migration is the fix more than anything else, more than 5-year visas and all the other things that are getting the currency in the debate. And we've been working on a rural migration initiative with people in the room, people from communities around regional Victoria, as well as the rest of the country. So why do we need permanent migrants? Well, that's how the Australian population grows. 60% of our population growth is migrants. So if it's not 60% of your population growth, you're missing the trick on why our country continues to grow. They help to fill workforce shortages. Evidence is very clear now they create new jobs, important source of population growth, and of course waves of migration throughout rural Australia's history have helped to revitalise communities and get us to the point where we can take our next set of opportunities. We've got some real long-term workforce challenges. So just the things that my numbers guys pull back on and say, wow, this is quite stark. So first of all, we've got very high participation in lots of places. So this is the people who are either working or unemployed in the community who are working age, over 15. So it's up in the 70s for lots of rural areas. Now the national is sort of around mid-60s or a bit lower. So anything in the 70s, anything in the mid-70s is incredibly high. Combined with that, we've got very low unemployment. So of those people participating in the economy, there's not many people at all who aren't in a job who want one. And the population is old. So, you know, one of the big things about the last census was a lot of places in rural Victoria turned 50. The average population's got to 50. And so that makes these sort of basic labour market stats even more significant because with an ageing population, you expect participation to be lower. But of course, people work hard in rural areas and don't leave the jobs, and people don't leave farms, and of course that's why rural areas get these kind of stats. And the last thing is we've got the drain from communities that's been going on for 20 or 30 years, and it's pretty consistent. All of that means no spare workers, no available workforce. If a business wants to expand, where do they go? If someone brings investment to a community, who do they hire? And in a lot of cases, for places, dunno. And it's great if we can get someone from down the road, or there is someone locally who needs that job, but in most cases, places with these kind of numbers will have no options locally and a real challenge in attracting people from elsewhere in the country. The other big issue, and what underlies this, is working age population growth. So if you look at this map, this is 2006-2016 census. We split it into two bits, and the red areas, and you can see how important they are in rural Victoria, negative growth 06 to 11 and negative growth 11 to 16. So really, apart from some of our major centres and some LGAs that have got a major centre in them, we're seeing a declining working age population. So the capacity to do the work that needs to be done. We don't want to win the productivity game by getting rid of people. Rural Australia is incredibly high productivity, really high productivity, but we've won that productivity game by losing people and more work that we depend on being done elsewhere, and I think we've got an opportunity to do something much different in the future. Now, if you look at the red areas and then you look at this map, you can see very, very similar. So this map is that map where we've got a decrease in the Australian-born population. So people are moving out of the region, or people are dying, or people are not there anymore, and an increase in migrants. So I'm not talking about doing something new. I'm talking about doing something better, and I'm talking about doing something at a scale we haven't done before, and in lots of places where we haven't actively done things before. And this trend, again, has been consistent for the last few years. So this is where our population growth is coming from, and we know that there's jobs there. Just to underpin that, the last 2 years, regional job vacancies have gone up 20%. Major cities have only gone up 10%. And the areas where the vacancies have risen furthest are those further away from capital cities. Now, we know as well, particularly in rural communities, there's a lot of hidden jobs that aren't advertised. There's a lot of people whose businesses could be bigger, and they may even have the cash in the bank to invest in growth, but no confidence that they'll have somebody there to do the work and no capability to do more themselves. So we know that there's a lot of hidden jobs, and some of the best examples of migration strategies are where they've just matched people to jobs that were already there and work that wasn't being done. There wasn't necessarily any new investment. The other thing, and I don't have numbers on this, and it really frustrates me, is I think we're getting more and more reliant on temporary migrants. So I think people in Canberra look at the census and they see job numbers declining in some of these rural areas. But what that doesn't necessarily show is the job in the pub that the backpackers doing, or 4 backpackers are doing over a 12-month period, or the jobs in the meatworks that are permanent and have been filled by very temporary workforce for a long time. So I actually think this is understated for a number of reasons, and it's a very important part of what's happening in the economy right now. So the solution that you guys have created, people in your community have created, we know about the wonderful example in Nil. I've been really excited to have some involvement in the great things that's been done in Hamilton over the last 12, 18 months now, and the attraction of migrants to that region. Pyramid Hill is a different story with Tom Smith up there and the way he's been able to get quite a significant number of Filipinos into the town. Locally led migration is simply communities taking control of this issue. In rural areas, if we want people to come, if we want the right people to come and we want them to stay, we need community leadership. The employer-led approach that works in the cities, I don't think is right for rural communities. Employers are just looking to fill their needs, keep business going. They're not necessarily concerned and they're not necessarily able to do the settlement and other things that needs to work. Whereas communities have the opportunity to identify groups of employers who together have 5, 10 jobs that need to be filled and can't be filled, which enables a more significant settlement, enables small groups of people to join communities. And they have the capacity to help them settle, to help them feel part of the community. And if you don't believe me, which I hope you do, colleagues in this room will know all about that. So where this has really worked, where places have gone from population stagnation or population decline to 15% population growth in 5 to 10 years, it's been community-led. Local government has always been part of it. Now, they haven't necessarily had to lead it. Often it's been people in the community who've led it. But if the local government's not up for it, it is very hard to make this stuff work in any community. So local government's a really important player, and this group as a whole are a really important player in this. Now, we're just putting it together as part of scaling this up. We're working with the Scanlon Foundation. We've got people from around the country together on this issue who've had some success, who've been working on it at the community level, and just connected people together and started a conversation about what was working. We're putting that into a toolkit that any community can use to do their own thing on this. The foundations for success, they're pretty obvious, but bloody hard to do in reality. So identify suitable employment opportunities. They're out there, but often they have to be tracked down, Regional employers don't use Seek so much, so just getting online won't tell you much about the local jobs need, and neither will necessarily going to see a job service provider. You've got to think about the services and infrastructure piece, particularly housing is often a challenge if you're going to get groups of people coming to a town. I mean, if you've been in a country community that's had a fairly stagnant population and some population decline, you might have some housing stock, but it's a bit beat up. It might not be fit for purpose. And a lot of these towns have had to go back to building houses, and people have been building in Pyramid Hill and Dalwallinu and WA. So, that's a bit of a step change for a local government that's been managing a town with a stagnant or declining population. So something to get onto early, as well as settlement and other services that people might need, depending on who they are. You've got to have community support, and there's no one better positioned than local government to build support for this. There's no one more legitimate than local government to build support for this. Others in the community do. There's Rural Australians for Refugees. There's often businesses. Lots of people play a role in this, but local government's very important. And be prepared to start small. This really works well when you get a first couple of people, couple of families coming and settling. Community can get to know them, they can get to know the community. Then you get access to a big network of people, either here in Australia or overseas. There's been success with migrants who've been here for often a long time, up to 5, 10 years, have got citizenship wanting to move to rural areas. Equally, there's been some success with direct migration, skilled and unskilled, and the visa system as well. So we'll have a toolkit coming out to share the knowledge, and we're networked with people around the country who've been doing this, and hopefully there's some opportunity for some mentoring and sharing of practical experience between people, as well as making the toolkit available for people. So that's enough from me. I just wanted to get a conversation going on this. I'm really interested to hear about the thoughts that others in the room who've been part of this or thinking about it have got on this issue. And I guess my question is, can we scale this up to be something that's working across rural Victoria, rural Australia more generally, in the next 5 years? There's a couple of things we've been working on. Firstly, some policy change, particularly around the visa system. The visa system does not work at all well for rural areas. It just isn't. It's set up to pump temporary migrants in. That's basically what it's set up to do. They don't understand the need for permanent workers and the industry skills lists and all these sorts of things. The state government tries to put together its best estimate of regional gaps, but as you know, what's a gap in Corangamite versus what's a gap in East Gippsland? You know, sometimes it'll be the same, sometimes it'll be very, very different. So there's these things called designated area migration agreements, and I know there's one part of the state that's looking at this right now. We think that's a place-based way where you can go and say, these are our needs, they need to be a priority in the visa system, and get something that works for a region. The government's very keen on this. I met with the Immigration Minister on Monday and they want to see more happening, and they're really eagerly awaiting about 6 regions who are bringing forward options on this. You know, I guess I'd ask the question is there a reason why the whole of Western Victoria doesn't have one of these? You know, I think given the renewables investment and other things that are happening in Mildura and that area, given some of the proposals I heard around Horsham, the documented shortages around Warrnambool and everything in the communities around, I just think there's a question as to, at least in those areas, why we don't need one of these probably for about 20 years until we really fix this stuff up. Other parts of Victoria will be different because connection to Melbourne and population growth and other things may mean this isn't the right approach, but certainly for Western Victoria, parts of Northern Victoria and potentially parts of Gippsland, this is something really to be looked at to make sure your priorities are part of the visa system. Because we always get to this stuff too late, you know. Investment comes, there's 400 jobs to be filled, hang on, there's nobody here, bugger. Now, either the investment doesn't happen or we're 2 or 3 years late or they come from somewhere else. So I think we can get ourselves much better prepared to have this system ready to go, working for us now, and to be able to scale it up when we need it or tampen it down when business conditions aren't right. I talked about the support and information network. We're pulling together this toolkit. We've been bringing together networks around the country on this issue. We're keen to build that up and just get people talking and sharing knowledge and get people more confident in being able to do these in their communities as well. We've also proposed a rural migration initiative. There's a lot of activity in this space, but it's very, very fragmented. We've got AIMS, the Settlement Services Group in Victoria, doing stuff in northwest Victoria. We've got things happening in the South Coast. We've got Bendigo Bank, Community Bank Group, who's doing some work on this. We've got various local governments. There's money starting to become available, which is excellent, but it's very fragmented. I think we can just build a lot of confidence, share a lot of lessons, and bring bigger resources and get bigger policy changes if we're able to coordinate this. So we've talked about, we've offered to do something at a national level if that works, just to get coordination happening. And I guess the question I'd pose on the back of that, as I open things up for discussion, is, you know, is there a role for RCV as a one group that brings together rural councils in Victoria? There's certainly an opportunity for that coordinating, networking role, formal or informal. I'm really interested to hear some thoughts, questions, and particularly the people who are actually working on this practically in rural communities in Victoria, interested in your contributions to this discussion. As I say, you know, the time is right now for us to make some progress on this politically, economically. I think, you know, we need to make the best of this. I've been in this gig for ages. I see nothing else that changes rural population. I just, apart from crazy investments that will only randomly happen, I see nothing else, and that has such potential to be led by communities and owned by communities and really be something that our rural places make them happen themselves. I think it's the most exciting thing I've seen working in this stuff for nearly 6 or 7 years now. So, enough from me. Thoughts, questions? Who wants to make a contribution?
So Michael Tudball, Southern Grampian Shire. We're obviously working in this space and working with the Great South Coast on a DAMA, Designated Area Migration Agreement. The thing that came to me after last Friday's meeting that we had was there's not one fix for this. And the thing about DAMAs, and I don't know if anyone knows much about them and I don't profess to either, is that it is really a contract between an employer and a body like a council or something to employ a number of people. In Warrnambool with, say, meatworks and abattoirs, if that's 150 and 200 jobs, quite straightforward that you have an agreement and happy days, get people in and off they go. In places like Hamilton, we've got 50 jobs on across 40 employers. To have 40 agreements and someone to administer that, I don't get the sense that DAMA would be a solution for an area like ours. So you need other approaches like what we're doing and a multi-pronged. I'm just wondering in your advice or your view on the various things that are there at the moment, and are there some more appropriate to others, like what you mentioned about maybe the whole of Western Victoria rather than just 3 of us?
So, DAMAs haven't worked in the way the bureaucrats have tried to make them work, or not tried to make them work, to be frank. So I think there's a real opportunity for regions who are getting involved in these processes to push back on Home Affairs and say, that's crazy administrative burden, let's find a better way. So I think their whole mindset is around large employers, large numbers of... That's just how they think about these challenges. And I've talked to the ministers about there are significant numbers of jobs, but they have to be sort of scooped up locally, you know, because, you know, you've got a mechanics business, retail stores, other, you know, just good local, regional small businesses. You know, setting those poor buggers loose in the migration system isn't going to be good for them or anybody, but having an opportunity for them to access, use the system, connect with migrants efficiently is a great opportunity, which just adds to their options, you know, if they can't get people locally. So we're really keen to understand where the way Home Affairs would like or thinks DAMAs should work and the actual reality of how they need to work, because I think, you know, I was in The Australian yesterday saying these have got to be reformed, they're slow, they're onerous, and they haven't really worked. And I think if we get all the regions together who are working on this, we can gang up on the feds and say, well, this isn't working for anybody, so I think you're the problem, not us. And, you know, particularly when you've got Conservative governments, we can talk about red tape and other things. I mean, and from their point of view, they want assurance that the migration is real and that, you know, I'll pick on a random organisation, let's grab a bank, given that they're being picked on more widely. The Commonwealth Bank hasn't set up the Hamilton office, and they're suddenly going to employ 500 people in Hamilton on these great regional visas and are actually all in Melbourne. Now, the Commonwealth Bank's not going to do that, but that's what Home Affairs is worried about. And by having a regional partner say, no, this is a real business, it's a real job in our community, and, you know, if they're on the dodge, we'll know about it. That's what they're looking for, and we're actively working to settle them as well. So I think there's a good opportunity for regions to really reshape how DAMAs work.
Hi, Councillor Peltz, East Gippsland Shire. We just recently have passed a, what do we call that? Yeah, the immigration effective to our region, and I'm hoping that our council is working with you to attract migrant, and particularly in the area of employment, because we actually run a transport business and we've had a job vacancy for a diesel mechanic, a qualified diesel mechanic. We would take 2 if we could find them, and we've had it advertised for probably 18 months now, and our quality of workers in the area is actually very poor. We're happy to put people through, or, you know, juniors through apprenticeships, and they've come out the other end. They're looking really great. But with regards to that, there is a real shortage of hands-on fully qualified workers. And yeah, I'm hoping, I'm not sure what we need to do to be able to get on this program, but there's definitely work out there, you know, for people looking for employment and you know, settling in our rural areas. But let's face it, a lot of our rural areas were developed from migration originally. My husband's father is an Austrian who came over for the water scheme in the Snowy Mountain scheme, basically, and a lot of the rural areas are based basically on immigration and employment in the first place. So it's not new to us, it's just something we haven't done very well in the past.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a couple of myths about this issue that a lot of people get caught up on. I think one is that migration's not a thing in rural Australia. Somehow, I don't know, we all got off the boat in 1788, went to the bush, and, you know, that's the way it's been. When you dig below the surface, and, you know, there's waves of migrants from different backgrounds that have been part of communities' development. I think the second thing that the politicians are absolutely petrified of is the whole One Nation thing, and the idea that rural communities will come in behind that. And, you know, my experience is the exact opposite. Every community's got fears and questions to ask, but my experience is the exact opposite, is that rural places want to welcome people, particularly if they're keen to work and keen to be part of the community. I think they're the... and diesel mechanics is one of the classics. It's been a big thing. Dalwallinu in WA, I think it's probably on the agenda in somewhere like Hamilton. I think in Nil that was part of one of the businesses that were able to benefit from the Karen refugees there as well, because, yeah, qualified people are in short supply generally and hard to get to rural areas. So very keen, and I was. We haven't been working with East Gippsland, but I'd wondered whether you guys were starting to think about this, particularly for the places further away from the valley.
Because we actually have a veggie growing, quite a big veggie growing area.
Yeah.
They bring in their own from overseas, so I'm not sure how they do it, but they're actually on some kind of care up program.
Yeah, we've stayed away from the temporary stuff because we really want permanent. We want people to be here for long term. Well, why would you not? Why would you not? Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts, contributions people want to make?
Hi, Jack. Anita Rank from Glenelg Shire Council. Thank you for the advocacy that you do in this space. And we've seen that the Prime Minister and Minister Tudge have probably pursuing this, but maybe that's come off the back of the population debate and the 25 million thing. And so, but in this state of Victoria, in your opinion, why do you think that either sides of government are really not championing this as an option or a solution to congestion in Melbourne and decentralisation? So they talk about decentralisation, let's say flippantly, but why don't you think they've actually really championed and pushed this as an election platform to address population decline in rural areas?
Look, I think there's federally and at the state level, both sides of politics, when we've had the chance to really engage on this stuff, are very supportive. I think there's a couple of reasons why they've held back. I think they're scared of themselves and the issue being really politicised by those who frankly just want to use migration discussion as an opportunity for whatever their version of right or left dialogue is, and I think there's genuine concern, which is part self-preservation and also part not wanting to get the issue chewed up and then make it hard. So that's what I think's holding it back. Politicians at the moment are so nervous; they're just petrified, mostly because they haven't got control of the discussion, the Trump, all of these things. They're just petrified of getting it wrong. So the thing that changes that is how strongly and widely communities come out and talk publicly on it. You know, I think that's the more people who are in positions like the one you're in, Anita, in rural areas, the more community groups, the more employer groups who are speaking up and saying, "Come on, you know, the idea that we're not wanting to see this happen is wrong. We want to lead it. We want to make it work for our place, but you need to make that easy. I think there's communities need to lead this. I think, unfortunately, politicians are feeling a bit unstable, particularly in Canberra. You know, we were having very good conversations with a group of ministers about this, and then they changed. Not a reasonable refresh in things, and you know, but again, we've seen the federal government float this a number of times, and they haven't yet landed. It's been challenging to see the ag visa politics sort of swallow what I think is the bigger issue up, and hopefully we'll get back to what matters. So I think you guys can play a real role if you can be a little bit more braver than your state and federal counterparts and say this is working and we're doing great things in our community. Why don't you make it easier for us to do more? Because it'll take a bit of pressure off Melbourne too.
David Evans, the Golden Plains Shire. I think all our groups, all our shires, we all have our economic development officers, and we're all trying to get something going there. Now, one of the things that we probably have in the rural area is that you have your different companies, you might have your abattoirs, you might have your bigger businesses that are going to move into the area where you're going to get a large number of workers requested. Now, maybe this is an opportunity as us as rural councillors, why don't we get our economic development people together and say, right, every shire is going to have a different level of want in terms of these type of workers. So if we can have a database so that we can actually put out there how many people that we may want in particular fields, and we use that as the database to go back to your organisation type and use those systems to actually find those people. Because fundamentally we're all different, and we can achieve this as a group, but we won't achieve it if we do it individually. And I think that's probably the direction that maybe we should focus on, and it should work.
Sounds like a fantastic idea to me. Look, I think, and for those economic development people, to be able to say confidently, if you invest in our place, if we can't find workers in town ready to go, if we can't find people in the district or who are ready to come from Melbourne to do the work that needs to be done, we can make it happen anyway. I think that to have that level of confidence when people are talking about serious investments in your communities, I think would be a game changer for just being able to build that investment pipeline that we need wherever it's coming from. So I think that's a great idea. Anything we can do to help, more than happy to.
Thank you. Councillor Toohey from Rural Shire. So we have an issue of enormous amount of growth coming to our area, and with that we've seen a lot of effort in providing the necessary things that workers want, and that's housing. We also then are finding a lot of our people are leaving on a daily basis for work. And at the moment, a lot of the people in the Rural Shire, skilled set, is they're leaving and heading into the rural councils to the west of us. And they're travelling in excess of 3 hours a day to carry out these activities on renewable energy projects mostly. And a lot of them have tried to seek housing, suitable quality housing to... a lot of the businesses have said, we've tried to find some houses and put you guys up so you're not travelling so far with the girls. And the problem that they're facing is the availability of good quality accommodation, which is a key ingredient to get somebody to come and live and spend in your area. So what they're doing each day is travelling to and from our patch, coming back, bringing their income back with them, spending it in our area. I do see one of the key things that needs to be available, and a knowledge base of that availability is good quality housing, so that people who look for a job and find a job and then find out that, yes, I can also get good housing in that area for my workers or for an individual with a skill set. It's a key thing that's missing at the moment that I'm seeing from people in our community where their choice would be to not travel that 3 hours a day or more, and in some cases may in turn then find permanent local jobs and stay in the region if they were given the opportunity.
I think it's spot on. And the challenge with these small communities is one, there's not really a housing market of any scale that can respond in the way we've got in other areas. But I think there's probably a commercial solution to this, particularly if we can identify the gap in lots of places. And so somebody can invest in something where they're invested in lots of places and it manages the risk of, ups and downs that rural communities go for. So I think you're spot on with one of the things that holds this back. And I know, I don't know if Hamilton's started to hit issues yet, but I know lots of other rural communities have bumped into this pretty quickly once you get a bit of momentum. It's not a thing for government. Local governments sometimes have gone there, but you'd be hard pressed to get state and federal in. But I think if we can surface the need for housing and the potential for long-term rental agreements and other things to pay things off, we can find a solution to kind of accelerate the response, because, it's crazy people driving 3 hours to work into places that need people and would love to have people locally. Sounds like some version of madness, really, doesn't it? But, if we don't, the market won't necessarily respond, The Australian housing market isn't looking at rural communities, they're looking at places around here. And so, I think it's absolutely a key barrier, and I think we need to sort of bring the demand together and see if we can't get a commercial solution to accelerate some of the investment. And then local government's got to be up for approving a few lots and doing the other sorts of things that need to happen before housing can come online as well.
Adrian Weston from Camp Aspie, Jack. So there's been a lot of discussion around the regulatory and the economic, but to me, where it has been successful, for example, in Shepparton and more recently in Loddon, in Pyramid Hill, is don't underestimate the importance of the social and cultural support, and whether that's done proactively or by way of critical mass of particular cohorts of immigrants. That's critical to it being successful. So if it's done, I'm interested in your thoughts in how important the integration of the cultural, social and the economic are.
Crucial. So I don't talk about that so much because I'm getting this case up on economic grounds, workforce shortages. I made the judgment early, and I'm not advocating for renewal of rural communities except to the Nats. I'm not, I'm going to government saying there's workforce shortages and the migration system isn't helping, and communities are suffering as a result. But that's why community-led migration matters, because it does work. We get a small group of people from a similar background who come to a community, so they've got support with people with similar backgrounds. But then you get that initial level right, so the existing community can get to know them and they can feel part of that existing community as well. That's when this works really well, and then you grow from there. And that's been shown in all of the examples. But volunteerism, that social side, that's rural communities' competitive advantage. So I guess I don't go on about it too much, because I think you've got to activate it and you've got to get communities willingly wanting to make it happen. But when I look at, apart from natural resources and the ag sector and all the things we talk about, if there's one competitive advantage that small rural communities have got, it's your volunteers, it's your community groups, it's your ability to take people in and make them part of the community. We don't always do it, but we can do it when we want to. So no, you're absolutely on the money, and that's why local government working to build that community support with community groups and others is crucial, and making sure services that are needed, people need English or people need other things that aren't already available locally. All of that, that's what makes this last, I guess. That's what keeps people there for 5 years. It's crucial. I mean, the school in Pyramid Hill sponsoring people's kids come out.
Jack is staying for lunch, so if any of you do have some further questions, I suppose I should have made mention of our Karen community in Nil in Hindmarsh. It's just quite an unbelievable story. They have just bought their 23rd house in a town of 1,800 people, 1,900 people. They've just bought their 23rd house recently. We've been very fortunate that the Nil Neighbourhood House and several leaders in the community have taken on board, and even simple things like taking mum down to the supermarket to show her how to shop. That's been the way our community has really taken on board the Karen. Lavaduck is our biggest industry, employing about 200 people. They would have closed. They just could not get skilled labour or unskilled labour. And fortunately, we had 2 or 3 leaders in the community that took it on board, and it's been a win-win. A lot of these people were in refugee camps most of their life, and they come to Werribee, and then they come to Nil. And they have assimilated very well, and I guess I'm very proud of our community, our shire, the way that we've taken that on board. I suppose on a personal basis, and I'm no expert, but there has to be jobs. I don't believe you can bring people in if you haven't got jobs, and housing's another big problem, Jack, that has been stated, because to bring 200-300 people to a small rural community, put them in an environment where they don't know anybody, they've got no work, it just won't work. So in our case, and I know Andrew down south, they've got a heap of jobs down there, and that's what we need to work on, is to try and get these areas with it. But it really is a win-win, and for our small communities, you heard earlier about our early childhood hub. We got federal and state funding for that because we had a Karen community that had a lot of young families, and we wouldn't have got a lot of that funding without that influx of our Karen community. So it's been a real win-win story, that one. And Jack, we wish you well in your endeavours with this, because I think it's the survival of our rural councils into the future. So Jack will be staying for lunch, so could you please thank him very much for his talk.